Hello there and welcome back to the channel. If you've been in a constant struggle to get your website looking great, or you're seeking to improve what you already know about making your website look better, then stick around till the end of this video. I'm going to be sharing 20 tips to make your website look great. Number 1, get a professional logo. Your website logo is the first thing people see. The feeling your logo evokes may make or break a user's perception of your website, so you want to be sure you're using a professionally made logo on your website. So you can create this yourself or you can get a professional to do it for you. You also want to be sure your logo is distinct and represents your brand effectively. Number 2, don't forget to add a favicon. A favicon is a small icon that serves as a branding for your website. Its primary purpose is to help users locate your page easily when they have multiple tabs open. It also helps to support the brand awareness and recognizability of your brand. Favicons are not to be confused with logos, even though they are sometimes the same. The favicon are typically used in a much smaller sizes than the logo, so they may be the company's original logo or they could be part of the logo. One thing to keep in mind is that you should keep your favicon as simple as possible. Number 3, use good quality image. High quality image is defined by an image sharpness, relevance, and speed. So nobody wants to see a blurry image on your site. Nobody wants to see a skewed image on your site. For businesses that rely on its website for consumer interaction, the importance of having sharp professional photos cannot be overemphasized. To apply best image practices to your website, you want to make sure your images are sharp and the subjects in the image can be easily identified. Make the file size as small as possible without losing significant image quality. There are a couple of websites that can help you to do this. An example of such website is shortpixels.com, tinypng.com, or bermy.net. This makes working with images a simpler task. Number 4, use consistent image tone on your website. This is very important. This is going to make your website stand out and look clean and professional. You don't want to have images with different tones. So let's say you get these images from different sources or from different cameras, and sometimes the white balancing are not usually the same. You want to take this image into an image editing software and make sure you give them the same filter. If you want your images to be black and white, you have to be consistent. Don't just put some images black and white and some colored, or some have sepia filter, some feel warmer than the others. They look like they are coming from different sources. You want to make sure that you have a consistent tone on your images to make your website feel solid and professional. Number 5, have a good color scheme. A website color scheme is more than just the aesthetics of the website. You want to make sure your website color scheme aligns with your brand's image and values. Color influences how people feel and increases your brand recognition. So a good color combination on your website will create a powerful visual impact to your visitors. There are a couple of online tools that can help you create the best color combination for your website. I'm just going to give you 2 of them: colors.co and colordesigners.io, or you can Google online color palette generator. And you're going to have a couple of results. Adobe Color is also a good one. Number 6, use a maximum of 3 colors. You want to use a maximum of 3 colors for your brand. And now this doesn't include the shades of your primary, secondary, and accent colors. Okay, it doesn't include that. And in some cases, using just 2 is enough with the shades. Do not go about using multiple different types of colors, except in rare cases where you can be very creative with multicolored design. But in most cases, you want to make sure that you stick to a maximum of 3 colors. Number 7, use light gray text on black or dark background instead of pure white text. This is something that is very important, and a couple of people don't really know this. Now let's take a look at some of the websites that have implemented this. Okay, so here we have the admin bar website. So this is a dark themed website, so it's a perfect example of what I'm trying to say. Now if you take a look at this text, you'll see that this text is not exactly white. It has some sort of it's a little bit off-white, or it has some sort of opacity to it. Now let's check it out. So that is the text, and if I take a look at the color, now you can see that this is not exactly white, but the one right under it is white. So if I turn this white on, you can see that this text becomes white, and it's kind of disturbing to the eye because the contrast is just too much. At the point it can become blurry, in a way. But if you just dim it a little bit, it becomes easier on the eye. So when you are doing a website, you want to make sure that you have a text on a dark background. You want to tone down the white a little bit. I mean, it's okay if you're using the pure white for the titles, it's fine. But when you're using a body text like this, you want to make sure you tone it down. Another site that does that really well is the ACSS website. You can see that this is also a dark themed website. And while the main titles are white, the body text, which of course you're going to spend a lot of time reading, are toned down a little bit to make it easier on the eye. Now, there's one website that broke this rule and it was really difficult for me to read. I came here to just learn JavaScript, and these guys use pure white text, and I found it really difficult to read this because it was just jarring at my visual nerves. So now let me show you an example of how they could have done. Let's take this block of text now, and let me just give it an opacity of 0.9. Okay, or I can just bring it down a little bit. Now you can see already that this is easier to read than this. This shines and becomes a bit blurry, especially if you have some issues, maybe visual impairment. This is really not a good way to do it. Now, if I take the whole of this and just give it an opacity of 0.9, you can see that, bring that a little bit down. Then, of course, I probably would need to undo this one. Okay. Now you can see that this overall looks better than this. So dimming down toning down your text content on a dark background is a very good way of making your website look better. Number 8, pay attention to contrast. Contrast refers to the difference in light between fonts or the foreground element and its background. So by using contrasting colors, your website content can be easily read by everyone. The contrast of your website helps organize your design and establishes a visual hierarchy. It simply shows what part of your website are most important. A good use of contrast will add visual interest to your content. Now, this is an example of a very poor contrast. You can see that it's really difficult to make out things here. And here is an example of a website with a very good contrast. You can see that the foreground and the background are really separated. You can see what is important in the website. So everything is really properly done here. Number 9, choose the right font type for your business. A good typography makes your website's visitor feel confident about your business. Therefore, the font must be as clean and legible as possible to attract attention. Use fonts that are easy to read. Your website text content must have the correct choice of font to attract your audience. For example, this is mkbhd.com, and you can see that the choice of font matches the brand. It's about a take, so they're using font that are sort of techy. I mean, it's not always compulsory to use techy font for techy channels or techy websites, but one thing you should never do is to use techy font for, let's say, a lawyer's website. It doesn't just represent the brand, it doesn't represent the type of business. So you want to make sure that you choose font that matches with your brand. And let's be fair, not everyone is good when it comes to choosing a font. And of course, you can, get these font types from the brand designer. You can get the brand guide to be able to use the right sort of font. But if you're kind of DIY, sort of a person, then you might want to use tools like fontjoy.com to help you with font pairing, and also use tools like fontpair.com. Then it's going to help you try to pair the font. But then, of course, the final decision, the final choice have to be with you to ensure that you're making the right choices. Number 10, use a combination of the right line height, font weight, and letter spacing. Some websites fall short of this simple rule. Even with the right fonts, you're going to need the right typography configuration to drive home the visual impact of the font on your website. So you want to make sure you have the correct line height. So let's say the line height of this website was just 1. Already you can see what the problem is. It looks really bad, and you don't want to do this. You don't want to have your fonts compressed like this. So as a rule of thumb, so you want to make sure that your line height is at least 1.5 for your paragraph text and a minimum of about 1.3 for your headings. You can also use a plugin to help you manage your line heights, and personally I use ACSS to help me manage my typography settings. So you can check it out in the link in the description below. Number 11, make sure you have properly aligned cards and buttons. Here's a typical card layout where you have the buttons and the elements. So you want to make sure that your cards are properly aligned. You want to make sure your cards are the same size. You want to make sure that your buttons are the same size. So even when you have content that are more, so for instance, if I come in here and then I duplicate these elements, so you can see that already this card is more than this one. Okay, so it might even look like a style because it's just the one in the center. But let's say I come in here also and I duplicate this element and then I duplicate it again. You can see that now we have inconsistent line height. So you want to make sure you fix something like this. Don't let your website to be like this. It's going to look unprofessional. It's going to look like you don't know what you are doing. So in some cases, you might want to really restrict your content for each card. It's kind of like the discipline. You know, talk to, if you're working with a client, let them understand that they can't have so much content on one card and then they have so little content on the other card. So all the cards have to be well balanced. It gives a very nice look to your website. Number 12, this is not a very vital point, but it's just one of those things that's going to make your website look neater and cleaner. So if you're having cards that have images on the top and text below, you want to make sure that you have the image flush to the edge of the card instead of being boxed in by the card's padding. So you want to make sure that you separate the image and the content so that it's going to look cleaner. So as you can see here, this card has a very clean feel to it because the images are flush to the end, whereas this still looks good. But then if you compare the two, you can tell that the other one looks cleaner and has a more modern feel to it. Number 13, if possible, keep the card's text the same volume. For example, I mean, it's really a difficult thing to do because sometimes you really don't have much power over it. But if you take a look at this card have similar volume of text, even though some of them are more by maybe one single line. But overall, you want to make sure you keep your card text just a little bit, you know, about the same length, about the same volume of text. This is going to make your layer look much better than it is. So if you have a website like this where you have maybe it's kind of like double of what it is, it's really not going to look as good as it looks now. So you want to make sure that as much as it lies in your power, try to keep your text size, the text volume in cards the same. Number 14, also a very minor one, but it can make a whole lot of difference. I've seen people do this a couple of times where they have a colored card and then they decide to put a drop shadow. Now, the primary purpose of a drop shadow is to separate the content from the background. Now, if you have a color like this where you already have this separation, it doesn't really make sense to put a drop shadow, especially when you start putting a drop shadow around it. It ruins the contrast. So if I go in here and then take out this drop shadow, I mean, I'm the one that put it there, but if I go in there and take out that drop shadow, and you're going to see that it provides a better contrast with the background than having that drop shadow there. So you want to have that drop shadow maybe on just maybe the hover, just to give it that visual separation from the background, but you don't want it to stay there because this doesn't provide contrast. This actually kills the contrast, whereas this just cleans up everything and makes it look nice. So avoid the use of a drop shadow unnecessarily on a dark colored card, especially if it is on a very bright background, especially if there is already a good contrast. Exception to that would be if maybe the container had a dark background. So let me say if this had a background of, let's say, gray or dark gray. Now this still has some contrast, but you know, sometimes it can be fine in this way to put that contrast. Why? Because this makes this background much darker than it is and therefore separate it more. So in this case, it is acceptable, but once you have the pure white background, that drop shadow becomes absolutely unnecessary. So just give that some consideration. Number 15, make use of white space. And when I say white space, it has nothing to do with the color white. White space is simply the amount of spacing you have in your design. It gives the design a breathing room. So you want to have enough spacing, that is your margins and paddings in the design. You want to give it enough white space to make that design look clean. So you can see this in some of the modern layouts. They have a lot of space in the design, and that gives that design a very nice clean feel. So you have a lot of space at the bottom and the top. And then even if you're not doing maybe a design like this, let's take a look at maybe a website like Stripes. You can see that there is enough gaps up and down, so you don't want to cram things up. You want to make sure that you are your cards, especially when you have box interface like this. So let's say you had an interface like this, and we had maybe the paddings were so let's say I override that padding and give it like say 10 pixel, and you can see that this is really bad. So if you had this type of layout and you have these paddings being very close to the edge, you can see there's no separation between the text and the edges of the card, so it makes it look really bad. So you want to make sure you give it enough space. It makes that design feel fresh. It gives it enough breathing room. So you want to play with white. This makes use of a lot of white space. Now, like I said, it has nothing to do with white. It just has to do with the amount of space, the breathing room you're giving your design. So you want to make sure that you follow that rule. Number 16, use a text with maybe an arrow for your secondary button, your secondary links. For example, now take a look at this. You have this call to action here, start now. Sometimes it's much cleaner and neater to use this style as your secondary link. So imagine we had this start now, and then we have another button here. It's not going to look as clean as this. So you're going to see that the primary call to actions, have this background, and then when you go here, you have this secondary call to actions. They're not necessarily call to action, they're just links. So you want to make sure that you have them, the style is much simpler form, like a text, maybe with an arrow like that. Now this is another example where you have these big primary call to action buttons, and then as you go on, you're going to see that here you're not going to have buttons like this. So imagine that you had this type of buttons everywhere. Everything is just going to look crowded. So you want to make sure that you reduce the use of the primary button style on other links that are not primary call to actions. So use this style instead if they are not the primary call to action button, and it's going to make your website look even more professional. Number 17, this is not a compulsory thing, but it usually helps a lot in making your website really stand out. And sometimes this can be very subtle, but it is to use an off-white body background for your website. For instance, if you're going to be having a lot of designs with white boxes, and instead of depending on just the drop shadow to bring them away from the background, you want to give your background some sort of off-white background, so you have your card sticking out much more prominently. So it just helps to give the website some nice feels when you throw in some off-white backgrounds to it. This is another example that uses an off-white background. Okay, so the whole of this section makes use of a very light gray, and because these cards are white, instead of just depending on just the shadows to bring it out, in this case they don't really have shadows, and I usually prefer it like that. When a design really doesn't have much shadows, it makes it look clean, feels clean and super sharp. So try that out on your website. I mean, it may not fit all the website, but in some cases where you have a lot of, your website is mostly white background, you're going to be having a lot of cards, and you want to be sure you have that little off-white background just to make some other elements much more prominent on the page. Number 18, style your forms to blend with the website. So sometimes you go to a website and the form element looks alien from the overall design. What you want to do is that when you're using a form, you want to make sure that you spend some time to style that form. For instance, this form blends with the overall theme of the website. So you have the hover on the input elements, and the text are the same kind of fonts you're using for your whole website. You want to use the same for the form. So everything should be consistent. This is another example of a website that has forms, and you can see that these forms are styled in a way that just overall feels native to the whole website, and it doesn't feel alien. It doesn't feel like it's something different from the whole design of the website. So don't just take the form and just put it in there like that. You want to make sure you spend time to style it, let the border radius fit with the overall border radius. You want to make it just underlined. You want to make it a box. So just do that, and it's going to make your website look much more cleaner and much more professional. Number 19, use custom scroll bar for better aesthetics on your website. So it always looks better. It always looks better to use custom scroll bar on your website, especially if you're in a Windows laptop or a Windows system that doesn't have the best looking scroll bar. So adding a custom scroll bar to your website makes your website stand out. This is another example of a custom scroll bar. It just makes the website looks much more sleek, So you want to make sure you do that if you can. This is not compulsory. Another thing, this might just be a tad too tiny. So you want to make sure you don't make it too tiny for accessibility. People can grab it. And also you want to make sure that the colors are properly contrasted. You can see this is black against yellow. So it has a good contrast. So pay attention to that. And this one is white against black. So it's good. And this is much better because it is a bit thicker and it can be easily grabbed. And finally, number 20, have a consistent brand identity. Be consistent. Your border radius, your link colors, your button colors and radius, your font sizes, etc. They all have to be consistent. You don't want to come here and have one border radius and then you go down and have a separate border radius. One of the things I noticed on this website, there were some sort of inconsistency in the border radiuses for different items. So you have this is different border radius and this is a different border radius. So you want to make sure that everything is consistent. So there are many different types of border radiuses for the cards, and the pricing table also has a completely different, doesn't even have any border radius. So it will feel much consistent if everything is, you just have a style for everything. So if you're having your buttons, all the buttons have to be the same. And you don't want to have this type of button. This is not a button. I'm just saying, for instance, you don't want to have a button that looks like this on the same website. Then you have another button that looks like this. So if you want it to be peel, let it be peel shape. If you want it to look something like this, like I said, I know this is not a button, so this is not what I'm talking about. But you don't want to have buttons that look like this and buttons that look like this on the same website. So make sure that everything is consistent. It's going to give it a very good professional feel. So those are my 20 tips that can make your website look great. I mean, this is by no way an exhaustive list, and in some cases some of the things that I've mentioned may not be really vital, but I've pointed out some of the vital ones. So let me know what you think. Is this something you have been doing, and which of these are you going to start incorporating in your designs? Let me know in the comment below, and if you disagree with anything that I've said, please let me know also and give me your own reasons. So we're all here to learn. We can also learn from each other. So until next time, have a great day. Bye.